Hello. Hi, I'm Tina Srabotniak. I'm the acting head of programming here at the Appel Salon. Thanks for coming out, and it's a great pleasure to have you here in the Appel Salon for this interview with Daniel Clowes in conversation with Seth. I'm going to introduce our interviewer, cartoonist Seth. He, of course, is best known for his series Palookaville and his graphic novel, It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. His work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Best American Comics, McSweeney's Quarterly, the cover of The New Yorker. He has partnered with Lemony Snicket for the series All the Wrong Questions and has illustrated and designed a deluxe edition of Stephen Leacock's Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town. He was also the subject of a solo exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario, which was wonderful, and his work is now part of the gallery's permanent collection. And of course, he is a dapper, dapper dresser. I don't think I need to tell you that. Please welcome Seth.
Hello. Thank you all for coming. And this is literally that moment where you feel like you should say that no need for an introduction. But tonight I will be talking to Daniel Clowes. And Dan is one of the premier cartoonists of my generation, probably in the top 2 or 3, not counting myself. And you know, the author of Ghost World, which many of you have seen probably as a movie, and books like Mr. Wonderful and The Death Ray, and probably the smartest cartoonist, I think, of our generation, certainly 1 or 2 in the top, and someone I have a deep respect for, who has produced a deep and moving body of work. So please give her a warm round of applause to Daniel Clowes. Yeah. I've got an advanced copy of Dan's book, Patience, which I've read twice already. And I think when I first read it, when I finished it, my very first question at the end was, is the book optioned for a film yet?
No.
No? I felt, because
No.
I immediately thought, like, my God.
Really? You thought it was fishing?
No, I just thought, like, immediately, like anybody who's making a movie right now, at the end of that book, I'd be like, where's his phone number?
Really?
That was such, it's a powerful, moving book, but it was such a page-turner and such a profound book that I thought, like, I couldn't make up my mind if it would be the greatest art film or the greatest action film ever made. It was a very interesting book.
Let's say action film, because nobody wants to make an art film.
It's true. Those days are over.
That's right.
But I guess the other question that brought to mind to me, that brought to mind was, it brought up the idea of genre. Almost all of your books, in some way, play with genre. I mean, not all of them, but most of them you started somewhere, whether it's a mystery or a romance or even a superhero story. In this case, it's kind of a sci-fi story. And I wanted to ask you, is genre important to you in any way, or is it just something to play around with?
I find it a good starting point. You know, I always think it's, I like the imagery of all this stuff. I mean, I don't call this book science fiction because there's no science whatsoever.
Yeah. No, I kind of noticed that.
Yeah. My son actually, who's 11, understands like all the physics of time travel and all that stuff from reading. He's really interested in that stuff, and he was asking me about how the time travel occurs in this, and when I told him, he was like, that would never happen. And so I shifted. Originally, I was going to say, it's a science fiction story, and now I'm like, it's a fiction, or it's almost like science fiction, or the term sci-fi is one that I know science fiction authors hate. You know, that's really dismissive. For some reason, to say SF is okay, but sci-fi is beyond the pale. So I think of this like I'm doing a sci-fi book, you know, because it's got sort of the trappings of that genre.
I like the fact that you kept that, like, that you didn't get into any details. Like, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone in this book, because
if you're looking for, you know, how do I invent a time machine, you know?
I just like that you even had devices in it that just filled in the gaps of the narrative. This is like, if he needs to do something, this handles it without explaining
That's
anything.
how I feel about all technology.
I
don't know how it works.
But that made me wonder, like, could it have just been a magic story? Could you have just made it like magic?
Somehow this having this sort of the apparatus of science on top of it all gives it more authority than somehow I know, like as a kid I liked the most implausible science fiction movie I could get behind. But anything that had like the supernatural or like a guy who had ESP, I was like, this is hogwash, you know? It's
Yeah. No, I understand that too. I felt
Yeah.
that way as a kid too. But I thought about that, and I thought, you've worked with a lot of genres, but like, are there some genres that are just too repulsive to like approach? Like, would you
what?
do
Like-
something with like elves?
Yeah, elves would be a tough call. That would be
Yeah.
tough. I feel like there's a lot of like younger cartoonists who are like
Yeah, elves
more
are hot.
into that kind
Yeah.
of ironically into Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, and that like they could do that with the
Yeah.
joy that you would need to do to handle elves. But to me, it's
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, like everybody who was into comics read Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. And I felt like, okay, I've got to read this stuff. And I remember thinking, like, this is way above my head, you know, this is like for adults. And
Yeah.
finally one day I started to read it and then just like, God, I hate this. This is awful. and I never, my son's read all of them, you know, he's like, no, it's great, you know, but
Yeah.
I could never get
Now, I wish
into
I'd
it.
been smart enough to hate it, but I
Yeah.
actually did like it when I was about
Really?
19 years old. I think I even had a drawing in my sketchbook of a troll or
Wow.
something at one point. But yeah, it's funny though. I do think like it's complicated how like different genres, like there's some of them you just
Yeah.
immediately like give them a bit more credence. And to me,
Absolutely,
like
yeah.
fantasy is like it's out the door, impossible.
it
But
would
I
be
would
tough.
science fiction, yeah, I'm willing to cut it some slack somehow.
Yeah. I've always wanted
Yeah.
to do a horror comic, like what my version of that would be.
Yeah. No,
It'd
I
be
love
like a horror of
yeah.
being in an airport or something. You know, it wouldn't be.
Yeah. No, I have a strong feeling towards, yeah, I like ghost stories. That's one of my
Right.
big things, and
Yeah.
I'm cutting it a tremendous amount of slack, but I would be very difficult to do a story with like elves or unicorns in it for sure. And it
Yeah, I
might
just
be
don't,
that we
I don't
grew
have
up,
the bearings
yeah.
for it. You know, it's
And we
not-
grew up at a
yeah.
funny time.
We
Like
did.
it was before that you would cut that any slack at all. That
Right.
would have been something to distance
Right.
yourself from 100%.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't get a lot of girls in high school with your love of elves back
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. When I was looking at before I read the book, the first thing I thought was, okay, Dan's going to do a book about time travel in some way. And I thought for sure, the kind of time travel story that Dan and I would do would be very different. I had a good feeling
you would
about
do,
that.
yeah.
Yes. And when I read
You're
the
in
book,
a way doing a time travel story with everything
Yes,
you do.
yes,
You're,
very much
You're
so.
living in that.
and I wasn't surprised when I read it that it was very true that we had the one thing I thought you made a very strong point was to avoid any sentimentality or any nostalgia or any sense of going home. Did you
No,
make it
yeah.
a point, like when you were working on that you didn't want to fall into that trap?
Well, actually, you know, you and I have shared a certain, you know, aesthetic value for things of the past, but I have to say I've become much less nostalgic as I get older.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, part of it's having a son and sort of seeing the world through that filter, but it wasn't part of what I was feeling as I was
Yeah.
working on it.
I felt that.
Sort of the impetus for the story was in the last 5 or 6 years, I've had a retrospective of all my work, a monograph about all my work, and
Yeah.
collected all my early comics. 3 projects that I wanted nothing to do with and thought, you know, I'll give me the check and you know, it's
Yeah.
fine. And then wound up devoting endless hours of my life to like processing all my early material, looking at stuff done by this alien being who was 28 years old,
Yeah.
you know, sitting in Chicago with his clenched fist trying to draw like Johnny Craig, you know, I felt like there was this profound kind of connection between this old guy,
Yeah.
and this crazy kid, and just sort of the flow chart of our lives that had taken place, you know, that the weird little decisions on a Thursday afternoon that led to me sitting here, you know, it was much more fragile than I ever would have thought, and that was what really informed the book, I think.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I don't want to get into details because I don't want to like ruin the story for anyone, but it seemed very pointed to me that you dealt deliberately with the idea of your own past in that book and made it a point not to, like just exactly like you're talking about, not go there. into that spot of like, you know, where almost everyone goes about the thought of like returning to their own earlier persona.
I felt like I had explored that earlier persona so thoroughly that I had no interest in ever. I knew that that would be a traumatic event to go back to that.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of a book on its own.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
It's one that you're busy writing, I bet.
I am, yeah. But I guess that brings up, we were talking a little earlier today, and I'm going to shift gears a bit here. And
you're not supposed to admit that. You're supposed to,
yeah.
we haven't seen each other in years. Spent all day killing this interview by talking to each other.
I actually tried not to talk to you today about any of this stuff.
It's true, but it happens.
Yeah, I never even brought up the book, making you think I probably didn't care for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why didn't he say anything about the book?
But I wanted to talk to you about Alvin Buenaventura.
Yes, he's...
someone who is important to you and the book, and someone who's recently passed away.
He passed away 2 weeks ago, and he was... he did all the unpleasant work on this book. I mean, he was a person who came into my life as somebody who really values artists, and he always just wanted to make himself useful to artists. And I kept saying, I'm totally self-sufficient. I've never worked with anybody, never had anybody assist me or anything. And he just was like, I've got to help you in some way. And he became so relentless, I finally said, okay. And I would always tell him, like, to me, the worst part of doing these books is you finish all the artwork and then you have to scan everything. Yeah. And it's, you have to do it all in pieces and all this stuff. And he's like, I'm gonna scan it for you. And I said, no, that's torture. I cannot make any other human do that. And he said, no, I'm gonna do it. And I wound up, to make myself feel better, I bought him the world's largest scanner as a present and said, if you scan my book, this is yours. It was this crazy German scanner that's so big that you actually have to operate it with foot pedals. And it came somehow with faulty software, and he had to send the crate back to Germany and then get it. It was so complicated, which everything to do with Alvin was. But he put all the production files together and just did all this stuff to make my life not hellish, and was my constant support when I was, he read the book before anybody by many months and was really encouraging, and he was just a really wonderful guy and a really good friend, and I'm still in deep shock and mourning, but I wanted to acknowledge him because he was a big part of this book, and this was kind of the last thing with his name on it.
No, it's true. I mean, when I heard Alvin was gone, I saw your tribute to him online, and I was very touched with it because Alvin was a kind of an awkward character in a lot of ways, and I was
the most singular human being. I could tell incredible stories about Alvin. We heard his mother told us a funny story. Alvin has always been able to somehow make money from comics in these really improbable ways, and then it's gone immediately. He would blow it. But she was saying, like, when Alvin was in middle school, like 10 or 11 years old, and they were poor, lower middle class, I would say, in California. She was going through his sock drawer, and she said she found a roll of cash of $2,000 in a 10-year-old boy's drawer. Like, I probably didn't see $50 till I was in, college. The thought of that. Yeah. And she said, Alvin, how did you get that? This little kid with a bowl haircut, how did you get this? And he just went, selling comics. Like, he had somehow, like, scammed his school friends. He was like, hey, give me that comic. And he had somehow parlayed, Alpha Flight comics into $2,000. And I'm sure it was gone by the time he was 12, Yeah. So anyway, that summed up Alvin kind of perfectly for me.
Well, it's nice to, it's good to talk about somebody like that, because I do believe that comics is filled with these sort of people who are essential movers. But in many ways, it's not like the bigger media like that people are used to. Comics really has always depended on these people who had that deep passion to do something with it.
It was pure passion. He had nothing to gain from it.
He made no money. I mean, I think that's we grew up in that era where nobody kept you out of comics if you could do what you wanted. There were no real gatekeepers,
None
but
at
there
all.
were people who made things possible.
Yeah.
Like people, the different, like Chris Oliveros or the people at Fantagraphics
Right.
or Alvin. It's like those people were the people who did the work, but they got none of the credit that we got. Because we were able to go
absolutely.
out and like do our own work.
Right.
But these people were willing to step in and like, be supportive.
I still can't fathom why anybody would want to do any of those things. Like, why
Nor
would
do
you want
I.
to publish comics?
Yeah.
It seems like such a crazy idea.
Yeah. I don't even know why we wanted to make comics, but at least we had the ego gratification of being the artists.
Right.
Yeah.
I always felt like in my case it was, I had just such terror of like having to deal with other people that I had just forced
Thank
this
God.
to work
Yeah.
somehow,
No, thank God there were people who, for some strange reason, wanted to publish the comics. I don't know. I mean, otherwise I would have just been drawing them and putting them in the closet.
Yeah.
But that is the great.
Still feels like that sometimes.
Yeah. No, that was the great power of like that world of the comics of the 80s, that there were people who were willing to go to all that effort to figure out publishing and distribution and to sell it to 12 people.
Right.
And that we got to benefit from that.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember thinking when we first began, I remember thinking I knew every reader by name at least. Or like I knew, it's that guy with a ponytail. It's like you knew.
You got the letters from the
90%
people.
of them,
The letters, you'd be like, this is that guy who writes to Dan Clowes all the time.
But it felt like a weird, like a very tiny insular world.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And that little tiny world was what kind of supported you through to this bigger world. Those people who, those oddballs who wrote you, was super important.
Right.
Yeah. And here's a question I've got written down here. It
Question
says,
2.
when I finished this book, I had to say, this book was pretty goddamn life-affirming. And I was like, what has happened to the Dan Clowes
I thought you were going to say.
I knew and loved? It's like your early work has like a kind of a mean edge to it.
It's an edgy yeah.
And that has changed over the years.
Yeah.
Which leads, the other part is, could you have written, I know you were planning a little small version of this book that never happened, a few pages, way back when.
Yeah.
Could you have written this book before you had a kid?
I could have before I had a kid, but not before I hit my age, I think. I mean, it's a lifetime of kind of processing, how things are.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like, I've never gravitated toward any religion. I'm really sort of opposed to the idea of religion. And in this book, I was trying to imagine my own religion in a way. Or, imagine something that's behind the fabric of reality. Because I do have that sense that somewhere behind everything is some unseen world that's much more mysterious and that we're seeing sort of like this movie version, and there's actually this kind of movie set world behind that, and I know that's probably just a paranoid delusion of some kind, but that feels much more
No, I relate 100%
plausible
to that.
than
I was just talking about that in the green room with Chester.
Oh,
but the funny thing about that is...
Who's the wrong guy to be talking.
But that's exactly what I feel from your work. I feel like there's a sense of fate or a mysterious hand in your books, that you have a bigger picture you're talking about. That really comes through in the work.
That's good to hear. I mean, that's certainly... I'm trying, I'm trying to create something that's bigger than just a story, that sort of has a primal quality to it. There's certain movies I feel like the Alfred Hitchcock movie The Birds is sort of about nature, but I also feel like it is a force of nature unto itself. Yeah, and there's something about that movie that you feel in a way that you would feel a thunderstorm or something, and that's I agree. Something I aspire to, whether it's possible to do that in comics. I don't know. I'm always kind of weirdly unmoved by comics, which is odd for somebody who devotes their life to it. It's very hard. I don't think I've ever cried at a comic. I think I might have cried at a comic, but not a lot. I do think that strangely, a movie, of course, is the easier answer. Right. I've cried at many TV commercials. Oh, the dog! The dog's being rescued, and But have you cried in a prose story? I think so, yeah. I think I have. Yeah. Oh, I know I have, for sure. Yeah, I do think comics, it's a little harder
but I don't think it's impossible.
No,
think
I don't
I've had
either.
one
I
or
just,
two.
I just find, even stuff I find really funny, I rarely laugh out loud. It's a much more internalized emotion, I think.
Is it because we've internalized it too much, being
Maybe.
cartoonists?
Maybe.
Yeah.
And maybe the whole experience is in our head so intensely that we don't have when you watch a movie, you feel almost like you're watching the surface of it, and you're just sort of outside yourself, but it's much more intense reading a comic.
Well, it's a very, it's such a powerful medium, film, because you've got, you're watching it on a big screen.
So many manipulations.
You've got music.
Yeah.
It's very, very different. I've always thought comics were really powerful because of the fact that they are one of the only mediums that you can't share with anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, you can read a story to someone. Try reading a comic to someone. That's always awkward. Yeah,
There must be couples who read them, at the same time.
Oh, I've done it.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we're like, and then he
Look at
says, and
this.
then she says. It's a bit awkward, though, to say the least. Yeah.
It feels more than anything like a one-on-one connection.
It only happens in the brain somehow.
Right. Because with prose, you're directing it so much.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody about how in comics, in prose, if you were to set a scene, you would describe the sort of general elements that would set that scene, but you wouldn't go into all the detail. That if you're drawing a room in a comic, you have it has these kind of latches on the door.
Oh, yeah.
There's these paint splatter, all these kind of things that you're intentionally putting in the panel that if you wrote that in prose, I guess that Ellen Robbe-Grillet used to do that, where you just describe in mundane detail everything. But anything short of that, you would not be doing the same thing at all.
I'm always a little shocked when I'm reading a story that people don't go into that detail. They'll be like, the description will be like, it was a blue room and she was wearing a red sweater.
Right.
And I'm like, that's not enough description. It's like, you need to have I want every detail of it, and that's what you do when you're drawing it.
Right.
You work out every single detail.
Right. Or not.
But people, in a weird, that's a good question. Do you not? I do notice in the new book you were keeping some things vague.
Yeah, there are certain things that I feel like are better served by letting people kind of plug in their own experience.
Yeah.
But I want to transmit as much as I can the very specific images that are rattling around in my head.
Are you trying to transmit like detail or the big picture? Like I would say
It depends.
You can't transmit like, the rusty sink maybe or something. Do you not bother with that unless it's super important? Is it just like an overall feeling?
Yeah, you can't do too much, or then it becomes like that guy Jeff Darrow, who drew every little
line,
and that's a different aesthetic. But to me, I see that and my brain can't grasp it.
Well, I don't even think I'm capable of that, even if I wanted to. But I know, I feel like that's not what you're trying to do with cartooning anyway.
No.
It's like you're trying to create sort of memory pictures that people will fill in the details.
Right.
But it is funny because it's a very different medium than others, because you're filling in a lot of details, but not all of them.
Yeah. And I find, when people read the books, the things they always remember are the little specifics.
It's true.
And often I'll read a book and I'll remember the two things that the author put in that are weirdly specific.
I usually remember a really mean line from your book. That's what I will joke about for quite a while.
Adrian Tomina read the book, and he said, the thing to me that I noticed is that whenever you draw a guy eating a hot dog, he always does it with two fingers.
I noticed that.
And I thought that's
it was
a really
bit
weird thing to notice.
Why is he holding it like this?
That's how I eat a hot dog. Yeah. And I went, and I was like, when would I have ever drawn that? And I was like, hundreds of times. I went back through my work.
I did notice that.
Did you spot that? Yeah.
And the hot dog was very small. It was strange.
No idea what that means.
We won't go into that. But anyhow, this book seemed really back to the roots. It was really about comic books, like the way that you drew it. We went back to and the thing that struck me is and this is no surprise, just even knowing you or even just reading interviews with you, is that so much of that power of the old comic books, like the sort of that primal imagery, that psychedelia, all that weird imagery like you were working on. But why does that stuff still hold such power for you at this point in your life?
Yeah, I don't know, because as I say, I don't feel terribly nostalgic, and a lot of stuff that I loved as a kid, I see as worthless, and that I would never sort of inflict on anybody through studying it, assimilating it. But there's something about the idea of these sort of like guys who were in World War II coming home and having these crazy delusions and having this really constricting job, where they're drawing these comics for kids and somehow releasing unconsciously these weird unconscious images.
Oh, yeah.
The one guy I was really studying a lot, there's this guy named Bob Powell, who was sort of a second tier, to Kirby and those guys. But all his stories were about these kind of weak little homunculus, like mad scientists who were in love with their beautiful female assistants and devised weird plots to win them over by building like machines that turn, walls into flesh and things. Just the most bizarre, they almost seem, like pornographic. They're so intensely specific, but it's almost hard to put into words what they mean. And I feel like he had no idea he was revealing so much of himself.
Yeah. And they wouldn't have worried about it because the audience it was going out to wouldn't have given it any thought.
Nobody except, Dr. Wortham might have noticed it. But to me, there's such a great appeal in that, and of guys just having to fill up pages with crazy things that popped into their head, and they always feel like they're out of a nightmarish dream. And it does feel like it came out of just the destruction of Western civilization during the war,
Well, I would say that just about every comic book published between 1946 and 1970 feels like it was made for some alternate reality where people were insane.
Right.
I have never understood, like you read that stuff as a kid, and you didn't give it a second's thought about how, like, every single comic from EC Comics was about how to murder your wife.
Totally.
Yeah, and that seemed perfectly fine.
That was haha, what an amusing tale.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and especially comics for 13-year-olds. Like, when did they want to murder their wife?
Yeah, you'd read some story about some scientist, exactly what you're talking about. It's like he's jealous of the other scientists, so he invents a device where he can run super fast, and then, unfortunately, it ages him 80 years. And it's like, well, there you go. I was like, well, that's nice.
That's
and then
lovely.
Next page. Yeah. Very, very strange stuff.
Well, and then even the whole hippie thing, all those were kids who grew up in reaction to the maniacal, film noir dads that came home from the war. So it's all part of that, and it's a response to reading those comics, I think.
That stuff's also strange. I was watching a film a few years ago, a documentary here in Yorkville, where hippies were talking to like the businessmen. And I have never seen such anger from those businessmen talking to the hippies. And I was like, God, you forget how angry the establishment was
they
at
had
those
all,
people who rejected
risked their
it.
neck at Iwo Jima, and then
exactly. And their son's
their
passing out a
son's
flower.
like, hey man,
Yeah, it's like, have a flower.
Exactly.
It's like, I want to strangle them too. I actually want to strangle them both. But but the funny thing is you forget.
The yin and yang for sure. They're very so interconnected.
And growing up in the 70s, you got both of that. It was very...
we were, and we were of that cynical generation where just nothing seemed to matter,
I hated both those groups so much.
So much, We had nothing to latch on to.
No. Thank God we had the nihilism of the 80s.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right, that saved us.
Okay, here's a question. So are you trying to stay fresh? Are you trying to stay up, like up to date? Or are you just like doing whatever you do? Are you competing with the young cartoonists?
Oh, what you mean? Like, do I like keep up with?
Yeah, like, are you keeping up and saying,
I
I
really
can do better than these guys?
In like the Will Smith term, like, yo, yes, I am fresh.
Yeah. No, like,
I'm
look at the young
not
work.
competing with anybody anymore.
Yeah.
But I definitely.
Do you ever think about it in the studio, or is it always just purely like I'm working on my stuff?
Now, for sure. That's one of the great benefits. Like as a younger man, I was competing with everybody, and I was feeling all the stress that you have when you're trying to figure out what's my place in this crazy little malleable world that we exist in. And I found that very stressful. And now I've stopped worrying about that. It's a certain point that just stopped being a concern. And I'm certainly not competing with anybody younger, because it's a whole different set of concerns.
Yeah, very much so. Are you aware of what the younger cartoonists are doing?
I'm always looking for inspiration in younger cartoonists, and and I see what they're doing, and I just don't feel like I can get anything for my work out of it necessarily. Like it feels freeing to know that they're doing stuff that I'm not doing, but it doesn't. I always want to see stuff that's like, wow, here's a whole new direction I can move in.
I've been pretty
and
impressed
I
with how
like
much things
my
change.
own direction, you know.
And things have changed dramatically.
Oh yeah, and there's people doing almost everything you can imagine.
Yeah, it's so different from when we started out.
Oh
because
yeah.
There
are literally thousands of good cartoonists that we'll never hear of.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
And we knew everybody.
Oh yeah. We were just talking about this earlier today. Like any comic that came out that looked interesting, you bought it.
Every one of them.
Yeah, and it wasn't much. You'd go into the comic shop and there'd be like one comic, and you'd be like, "Oh, this looks interesting. I'll buy it." But there was like one comic a month, maybe.
When my first comic, Lloyd Llewellyn #1, came out in 1985, I remember getting the publisher sent me a sheet of paper that had every comic that was published that month, and it was like 36 comics, something like that. And there was like 20 Marvel comics, 12 DC comics, and then Cerebus and it was like that. And you could have easily bought every single one of them. I don't know how comic stores stayed in business. They had nothing to sell.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
No, it was a funny period.
Now there's literally like a 700-page monthly thing that's got just choked with stuff.
Although there's still only one comic worth buying usually.
Or less.
It's all garbage. But there's a lot more of it.
There is,
yeah. And to be perfectly honest, not to be too glib, there's a tremendous number of interesting young cartoonists now. It's really remarkable. That has changed so much. But I don't think that here's like a thing like, and maybe you didn't feel this. Like, did you feel like you were part of like kind of a movement or a group? Did you feel connected to the other cartoonists doing it?
A little bit. After a while, did you?
I did.
Yeah.
Pretty early. And I think it might have been because I had like a couple of other cartoonists where it was very tight, and I thought like we're working towards something.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily have any friends where I was that were into the same thing I was, but then, I would correspond with like the Hernandez brothers and Peter Bagg.
Yeah.
And,
Why did you even decide it? I mean, like, you were in Chicago, I guess. Like you read comics as a kid and stuff. When did the point come where you thought, like, what was the impetus to make you say, I want to do something with this medium?
Well, when I was in art school, I thought, well, I'll be an illustrator, because that was like a big money, glamorous career back then. And then I thought, but I really like doing these interesting little comics. And the guy who was really inspirational to me actually was R.O. Bleckman.
Oh yeah,
sure. Because he did this little book called The Juggler of Our Lady that was sort of a proto-graphic novel. Yeah, I know you have. and I remember thinking he had a really great career kind of in the 70s. He would do his very interesting little illustrations, kind of do whatever he wanted, do animated films, and do these little graphic novels. And I thought, like, that's a career I can sort of understand, but of course it seemed like an impossible dream that would ever happen, but that was sort of what got me going in terms of drawing my own comics again.
Did you have any idea in those early days what the content of those comics would be? Like, did you have some
I wanted
direction?
to find a writer. I always thought I just wanted to draw it.
Yeah.
To me, I still hate the writing part.
It's funny because you're so obviously one of the great writers. Like not to put down your drawing, but I mean your drawing's perfunctory, but
it gets the job done.
No, but I mean like you really have like a totally recognizable voice that's very, very strong and very unique. And obviously, I think one of the things that I always find interesting about your work is that when I read it, like we were talking about genre earlier, is every time I read one of your stories where I say like, okay, here we're starting with like a superhero genre or the science fiction genre, is that you do something where you subvert the expectations of the genre that make me think like this is what every other writer who tries to do this misses the point at. I feel like the whole industry of superhero comics since the 80s has been about I'm trying to write a superhero comic that's not a superhero comic. And every single one has missed the point until the death ray, where it wasn't really about superheroes.
Yeah.
And that's where they've all missed the point. You didn't fulfill any of the expectations.
It's
not about the costume. It's not about when you punch the guy out or whatever this stuff is. You got to the heart of what the the fantasy fulfillment is, and
Right.
then you twisted it in some
Yeah.
way that wasn't obvious.
Right.
And it seems to me like that's something that is really unique in comics. You have a very unique voice.
I mean, that's good to hear. I mean, it's lucky that worked out, because I really couldn't find anybody. I would try to get people to write the kinds of material that I wanted to draw, and you think, well, there's a million writers out there.
Yeah.
Of course, they would love to
Yeah.
write comics. Well, first of all, it's very hard to write comics.
It is.
I don't know of anybody who's not a cartoonist who can really successfully do it.
Yeah. Do you think there's any successful collaboration, really?
You know, I used to think so, and now I've decided there isn't.
Yeah, I think
I really feel like it doesn't exist.
I kind of agree with you on
I
that,
feel like
but-
to me the beauty of it is that single person's brain transmitted into another single
Yeah.
person. And even, you know, I would have said like Harvey Kurtzman and Will Elder, but even that, I think the two of them alone, I
Kurtzman
prefer.
was better alone. by
Kurtzman was
far.
better alone, and Elder was a beautiful artist who
Yeah.
just needed a springboard to draw things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Oh.
you know, and...
Oh, no, carry on.
Oh,
Sorry.
all
That was
right.
me getting all panicky.
Oh. And even, you know, Harvey Picar, I always felt like, well, when somebody really good, like Robert Crumb or Drew Friedman drew it, it came to life, and the
Yeah.
other ones, it was,
Yeah,
you know,
I always felt that too.
didn't
I
quite
always-
work, yeah.
Yeah, I always thought, like, as much as I like Harvey Picar, who he collaborated with made so much
Right.
difference that it made me wonder, like, how essential it
Yeah.
was for him to be there.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't even remember what the
Okay.
question was, but
Back
I
to
know
the question.
I didn't answer.
Okay. Okay, here's a question. When I read that latest book of yours, and in fact, all of your books, there's a lot of rage in those books, Dan. Why are you so angry?
You know, that's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
I do feel like I felt, you know, a connection to the character in the
Yeah.
new book where he's, I mean, he's in a way a manifestation of my dad. My dad
Oh,
wasn't
yeah?
necessarily an angry guy on the surface, but he was was in the Navy in World War II,
Yeah.
and he had a bit of that very stoic, like where he could explode, and there was something mysterious about
Yeah.
that to me that I could always connect with.
Yeah, I was
And
kind of joking there,
yeah.
but the truth is there is a lot of, like, in every book of yours, there's a character who's kind of angry.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
something I'm dealing with the characters. I mean, part of it is I find it entertaining and amusing.
Yeah, it
I
is
like-
amusing.
I actually like like people who are so angry that other people
Yeah.
can't tolerate them. That's
Yeah.
like my address book is filled with
Yeah.
this. And I
Yeah.
have a great
Yeah.
sort of affection, maybe just because of my
Yeah.
dad, you know. But I have this great tolerance and affection for people who are sputtering with anger, and especially when it's over the tiniest.
It's funny,
of
it's the exact
slights.
opposite of how I feel about things. But
Yeah.
anyhow, you like oddballs, though. You do genuinely seem to have a real soft spot for people that would make you uncomfortable in real life.
Yeah, I've tried to you know, grapple with that, and
Yeah.
I'm much more.
Like, do you embrace that in the world, or just in
I
your
do
work?
much more than I used to be. Much more, like I was very easily embarrassed
Yeah.
as a kid, especially, and so anybody who would be like embarrassing to be around, I would
Yeah.
already like, "Eh," you know. And now I find myself much less worried about that, and much more like I find a lot of my friends. I'll be out at restaurants and everybody's looking at us, and I'm so used to the fact that they're shrieking about something that it doesn't dawn on me.
Well, I have noticed, even in the years I've known you, you seem to have become much more comfortable with yourself, and like, you seem much more empathetic than when I first met you.
Yeah.
I would say that you were meaner when I first met
Yeah.
you.
I mean, that I look, you know, looking back on my early work and seeing that in myself, that was, you know, people aren't angry and mean just because they're angry and mean. You know, it's based on a crippling sensitivity and a sense of self-doubt.
Yeah.
You know,
Were you doubtful?
What's that?
Were you doubtful in the beginning when you started out? Like, did you feel like...
Oh, yeah, always, and very just. It felt like a very precarious life to have to. It's still hard to have to depend on the whims of your audience to, you know, to keep things going. It's
Yeah.
you know, I'd be much more comfortable if I could just like if I had a job at the factory and I got my paycheck and I did what I had to do, you know, and I tend to think of my career in those terms. I think of myself as like an artisan who makes books, and I always refer to it as the family business, you know.
No, I feel the same thing.
Yeah.
It's funny that like you never really escape that fear that tomorrow it all comes to an end. Like no
well,
one
it feels
will
like
call.
it's like we're living in a fantasy world, which we are.
Well, yeah. Every once in a while, I think, thank God
it's much more comfortable to think of it as like an assembly line where we're creating, you know.
Yeah. I think we might be approaching the question and answer period.
Where we let the great unwashed ask their question.
So, Mr. Clowes, your books have been adapted into film, and I was wondering what your feelings are on the relationship between comics in general, but especially, I mean, you know, there's lots of comic book movies out these days. Maybe not your style of comic books, but the relationship between the comic books and movies, and if there's anything about your writing that you feel maybe lends itself to film in a particular way.
You know, it's hard for me to answer that just because I don't want to like analyze my own work, but I think it's because having adapted my comics to film, I think the things you're looking for in adapting something into film are like a very controlled story, a concise story, and really strong characters. And it's very difficult to adapt a very long, like a Don DeLillo novel into film. It's, there's a lot more going on than you'd have to pare it down so drastically that you lose everything. And I find with my comics, it's often you're enlarging what's on the page, and I think that's why they are, people see them and think, oh, I could make a film out of that. All right.
Hello. I was curious if you could speak to your use of like female protagonists. I think of Ghost World and the like strong kind of female personalities, and how, if at all, you think about gender in your work.
The characters just come to you. They're not, I'm never sitting down and thinking like, I'm going to write about a female character, or I'm going to write about an old man, or the characters emerge from notes and thoughts, and all of a sudden they take over your life, and you can hear their voice, and that's when I know I can start on a book, when I can hear the character talking and just throw them any situation and hear how they would respond. And most of the female characters probably come from my relationships with my wife, or with female friends and my mother, or people like that, and it's all voices I hear in my head, it's a schizophrenia more than anything.
Hello there.
Hey.
I have a silly question. One of your characters in one of your novels in Ghost World has the same birthday as mine. And it's December 23rd. Yeah, that's what I thought.
Oh, December 23rd, that's my wife's birthday, so that was
1979?
72.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
He's got your number.
I don't like that guy.
This question's for Dan.
Yes.
You've collaborated with Terry Zwigoff on, he directed Ghost World, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. Do you know if you want to do another further collaboration with him? Because Crumb is one of my favorite movies of all time, and so I'm planning to see Ghost World soon. And
it came out 16 years ago, so
cut me some slack. I wasn't the target audience then. I wasn't the target.
Don't wait in line at some theater.
He's been busy.
Yeah. So, any chance of for another collaboration with Terry?
I don't think so. Terry and I enjoyed working together, but it felt like everything we had to do together was done. I like talking to Terry, but it's not necessarily something I need to do anymore.
Okay. The shame. I mean, it's a shame because, like I said, Crumb is one of my favorite things, and Crumb is one of my favorite documentaries, movies actually, and there's also so many other people we can make documentaries of, comic book, especially if you know.
Yeah. No, that would never happen.
Oh. Would you never agree to be a subject?
Never in a million years.
I was wondering about that.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello. I'm just curious, in early days when you began to hit your stride with Eightball, did you have the sense that you were creating important work in that time, or was it more that it was a compulsion? Was it just pure excitement, or?
The latter, definitely.
Okay.
No, I mean, I had a sense that it had a somewhat of an audience that was building for it. You know, that was an incredible feeling. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, really, was because prior to that, I really thought, you know, this isn't going to work out. This is what I want to do, and you really needed to have a readership, you know, an audience, and so just to have this small crowd of maybe 3,000 people felt like the greatest accomplishment you could ever have. Still does, in fact.
Which brings up a kind of funny question. Like, I know that when you switched over from Lloyd Llewellyn to Eightball, a lot of it had to do with, like, I'm going to do what I think was the stuff I want to do anyway. Right. Do you think that's the secret to making good work, or is that just, that looks good in retrospect, like, because it worked out? Like,
that's a good question. You know, that's always the advice I've given to people.
Yeah,
you should just do whatever you really think is good. But that may be the worst advice you could give.
Yeah.
Certain people, it might be much better if you say constrict yourself to the, because I do think
reduce your own ideas to a minimum.
I do think that there's a strength in constricting everything so you don't have to worry about so much. You know, it would be a great relief for me if somebody said, like, you're contractually obligated to only draw 6 panels a page. And it has to be in black and white, and, you know, things like that, which was in a way how it was back then, you know.
Yeah, I mean, a giant open
color.
canvas is pretty confusing.
It's extremely, it's crushing sometimes. Oh, we got a big line now. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's go for it. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what you're reading right now that you're excited about, either graphic novels or comics or prose, nonfiction, whatever.
I've lately been rereading the stories of Nathaniel Hawthorne. So I'm reading the young kids.
Sort of actually stems a bit off the last answer you gave. You talked about sort of scanning large format, working sort of obviously getting things done that way. How do you find your process has changed? I mean, there's definitely a tonal shift in sort of how your work reads from early days till now. Has your process changed in the same way or differently, or how do you feel about that creation?
I mean, the sort of the basic process is exactly the same. I mean, I'm still drawing with a watercolor brush on Bristol board. You know, that hasn't changed at all. But in the early days, I wouldn't do work in color, or if I did, I was just, you probably work this way too, you would just get a Xerox of your artwork and watercolor it and send it off to some engraver who was sort of imagining what colors you had in mind. And it would come back so garish and bizarre. But it was there was something about it that was sort of appealing because you knew you had no control. So it was just, it was like it was a force of nature that happened to your work. But now with computers, the one thing you can do is scan the work and color everything very specifically, and it will be printed exactly the way you want it to be printed, more so than anybody in the early days of comics could have ever done. So I do enjoy having that control, but the process of sitting there and coloring every little thing is true torture to me. And I actually spent 11 months coloring this book, and it was like looking at like panels, like the face is this big, and you're looking at the eyeball and doing the highlight on the eyeball that's so small, nobody will ever see it. But I'm compulsive, I can't stop that. But after like 11 months, I really felt like I was living in the world of my comic, because I was sort of the same size as the characters. And I felt like, when I was done, it really felt like, okay, I'm out of that world. But it was, it was like like Tron or something, like a bad movie.
It's funny, back in those days, I used to do a process where I did an overlay where you'd pick one color, 2 colors, and you send it off to the publisher.
Ghost World, yeah.
And you'd literally I can remember where you'd be like, okay, the background's this color and the other color's this, and you'd look at a little square this big for the 2 colors, and then you'd be like, that's it. Once
That's
you
all
decided it,
yeah.
it's over.
Yeah, you
send
get it
that
back
out,
and you're like, oh,
you're like,
no.
oh my God, those are the worst two colors
Yeah,
that were
why?
ever created. Yeah. Now you can spend 20 hours with a production assistant saying, could you tweak that down a little bit?
1% cyan?
Yeah. In those days, you just committed. That's it. It's
Yeah.
like, this
There's
better
some beauty
work.
to that.
Yeah, it's funny.
Hello.
Thank you for making all your awesome stuff. Reading your stuff for the first time when I was like 20, I think, was like an aha moment. Where I was just like,
aha moment or an
yeah, where I was like, being crusty is the shit. Fuck all these happy people. I'm so glad for you. Thank you. This isn't an intelligent question, but I'm just really curious. What do you listen to when you draw and when you make your stuff?
I try to, I used to listen to music when I worked, and at a certain point I found it so distracting.
You just work in silence?
I work mostly in silence. And if I'm doing something really boring like the coloring, I listen to just like talk radio, which I can sort of assimilate without, I can tune it out for 2 hours if I want to, and then all of a sudden tune in for a few seconds. But which is weird because listening to it all day, every day for a while, it will inform my work. I'll see like, oh yeah, that was during the Benghazi hearing or something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's been a lot of questions around sources of inspiration, but I was just curious, maybe outside of that, who your favorite authors of fiction are?
I like a lot. As I said, I was reading Nathaniel Hawthorne. I was really interested in that era, so I read a lot of Poe and all that stuff. It's all that stuff is very East Coast based, New England based, and I feel very Californian, and I sort of wish there had been like a Californian version of that, but there never was. So I'm trying to sort of imagine that now for the new story I'm working on. Interesting.
Hey.
You again.
I know, I couldn't get enough. Oh gosh. I just had a question for both of you actually about comics in general, because you guys have both spent your careers, looking for, well, not your whole careers, but at least initially looking for an audience in your work. And, TV and film have kind of clearly usurped traditional novels in terms of popularity in, in today's culture.
Yep.
Presumably because they're much easier to consume. And I think of comics as being at least in some ways easier to consume for the average consumer than novels and prose are. Yeah. So why do you think that comics have not become more popular than novels and prose?
We're working on it. As I say, my son's 11 years old, and now there's a whole line of graphic novels for kids that age, and all the kids read all that stuff. They're really popular, way more than comics were when I was that age. We had to hide, and we were the pariahs of the world for reading that stuff, and now it's fine. So it's we'll see what happens in the next 20 years. I know the thing about if you have a novel, a 300-page novel, it might take you 12, 15 hours to read. It's a big commitment. And this book that I worked on for 5 years, Seth said he read it in an hour and 10 minutes or something.
Right, yeah.
That's about right, And
I was lingering.
Yeah, you're probably like, checking your texts as you were writing.
Well, comics aren't, I think one of the interesting things is that it was a junk medium. And people didn't respect it, so it's taken a long time.
And the people who drew it mostly didn't respect it. You hear stories of comic artists who would instead of carrying a portfolio down the street to go to drop off their pages, would have like a briefcase and pretend to be businessmen because they didn't want anybody to go like, loser draws comics. It was like saying like, well, I clean up at the circus after hours or something. It was just a really lowly job.
Yeah. And it's taken a long point to reach this kind of position of almost respectability.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's made a tremendous difference on, like, it's funny, we're coming in seeking a bit of like reading respectability just as print is going out the door. So we're lucky we're not like, that we've made it at all.
It's true.
It's a miracle.
We're in a window,
Yeah. I couldn't have seen this when I was a 16-year-old kid buying a comic at the newsstand. I thought it was a mass medium, and about 4 years later I realized this is the end of the line. It's over. It's like, why did I decide to do this? There's no comics medium at all, and then here we are 35 years later, and I'm
That's
actually
right.
a miracle that we're sitting in
It is
front
a
of this
miracle.
audience. It's
Exactly.
a miracle.
It's
Yeah.
surreal.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
First of all, thank you so much for everything you've done.
Thank you.
After David Boring, there was a pretty big style shift in your work, I felt like, where you started using a lot more like Sunday strip and like Archie style stuff. And flipping through Patience, that stuff seems like it's mostly gone. What about Patience made that change make sense?
I don't know. I don't think about that kind of stuff so much. You know, it's each book. My goal is to start completely anew, to do something, you know, that's very completely different from anything I've ever done, and to draw. I always want to draw everything in a completely new style. My goal is always to do something that nobody would even recognize as mine, and then it all turns back into what I always do, you know. And I think that's true of most authors and artists, you know. I think, but with this book, I never had any thought of like where it fits in the continuity of the other books until after I was done, and then, you know, then I can look back and say, I see, you know, where this comes from.
Okay, thank you. I can't wait to read it.
All right.
I would like to get your opinion on how was it like, because you were a filmmaker previously, correct?
Well, I've written screenplays for movies.
Screenplays.
Yeah, that's a little different than making the film, but yeah.
Right, and I want you to get your like, how was it like to like transition from screenplay to writing books?
Well, it was, in my case, it was the other way around. I did the graphic novels first, and then wrote screenplays from there. And it was a very time-consuming process to learn how to do that. Because when somebody first asked me to write a screenplay, I thought all I would have to do is go to my book, look at what I wrote already, type it, change instead of the drawing, say 2 girls in a room talking, you know, and then cash the check. I thought, what's better than this?
Right.
And I tried to do that, and then, you know, the first thing I wrote, it's supposed to be like 120 pages, and it came out, you know, 35 pages, and it you know, it didn't work at all. I just had people talking for, you know, and then you start to sort of assimilate all the rules of making films, where you can't have scenes go on and on forever, and you have to shift the action around, and you have to tell the story through the actions and all that. So it was sad to me that I couldn't just make money by transcribing.
Right. Right.
Do you feel like you've got that under your belt now? Like that you can write a screenplay fairly competently?
I feel like I have the technique now
Yeah.
that I could write. But, you know, the thing I hate to do that I would never do is research. Like, that's a lot of screenplays involve, like, you have to do all this research and, you know, like learn about the submarines.
You've done a little bit of that, right? Like you did that screenplay for those guys who made the Star Wars film in the backyard.
The Raiders of the yeah.
That must have had some research.
That was like I talked to them for an afternoon. That was it, you know. But I mean, the kind of thing where you really have to like get the nuts and bolts of how a submarine works and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That's a lot of screenwriting. And
that seems like what those cartoonists in the 50s wanted to do.
Right,
Like when you
Milton
see
Caniff
Kurtzman
and guys
talking
like
about
that,
that, like they wanted to go and get into that like technical detail.
Right.
And I can understand why you don't.
Yeah.